So, the first period of the Jewish community in Spain is a community of Jews, Latin-speaking, living in a Roman imperial area, and they were settled there, and they were flourishing, doing business, and they were established, as they were in Northern Europe, as they were all over the empire. By the middle of the 1st century BC, there were Jewish communities every place in the empire, all over the empire. And this is mentioned in many documents. Cicero, in one of his orations, speaks about the Jews living all over the empire. King Agrippa II, who was the last Jewish king, by the way, he was king of Judea at the time of the first rebellion, which led to the destruction of the temple in the year 70. In his speech to the rebels, urging them not to fight against the Romans, he also speaks about our people are living all over the empire, and if you cause trouble and you fight against the Romans, and you will be defeated because there's no chance that we could possibly be victorious. All of our brethren all over the empire will suffer as a result. So all of these evidences point to the widespread of the Jewish communities throughout the Roman Empire. And Josephus in his history, of course, refers to this many times, as does the Talmud. And the Talmud speaks about Jewish communities in other lands, and they speak about Arzot HaGolah, the lands of the exile of the Jewish people. But the Jewish people are living there of their own free will. They're not being compelled to live there. So it's not an exile in the sense of, I can't return to my homeland. It was simply, I'm going up to live in Cologne because I'm in partnership with my brother in Rome, and we're going to do good business there, and if I want to go to Jerusalem, I can go anytime I want. So there was freedom of movement throughout the empire. And remember, Israel was a part of the Roman Empire, and a Jew in Northern Europe and a Jew in the land of Israel could converse or send letters to each other. It was one ecumenical domain, one imperial domain, one government. By the way, at the same time, there was a diaspora of Jewish communities in the east, from Babylon, which is now Iraq, Babylon, which has the great concentration of Jewish life at that time, all the way over to India. There were Jewish communities throughout the old Persian Empire. And that you'll find mentioned in the book of Esther many times. It says that the Jews living in all the provinces of the Roman Empire, 127 different centers, from India to Ethiopia. Professor Salah Baron, who wrote this many-volume history of the Jews, says that in the Roman Empire itself, there were 8 million Jews at the beginning of the Christian era. And there were 80 million people in the empire. Jews were 10% of the population. 80 million Roman citizens, or Roman population, 8 million Jews. If there were 8 million Jews 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire, and assuming another 4 million in the East, so in the Roman Empire, 2,000 years ago, we had a population of 12 million Jews. Today, we have a population of 15 million Jews, not much increase. We've been battered. The Jewish people historically have always been considered a nation with a homeland in the land of Israel, and a dispersed population, a diaspora standing all over the world, that is from India to the Atlantic Ocean. Now, this one nation had many qualities, we will see, which unified our people, and I'll refer to them in more detail. But on the other hand, until the year 300, it was always known that the Jews are the people of the land of Israel. So in that sense, you could say, in the Persian Empire, the Persian inscriptions, the Persians speak about the land of Judah, which is the Jewish land. But the Jews live all over the Persian Empire. The Romans speak of Judea, the Jewish land, but Jews live all over the Roman Empire. When the Romans made their mutual defense treaty with the Jews, they made it with Judea and with Judah Maccabee as the head of Judea. So the Jewish state, you could say, was the political territory ruled by the Jews at a certain time. But the Jewish nation was universal. And the Jewish diaspora, that is, the Jewish people living all over the world, the diaspora situation of the Jews happens to be the dominant political condition of the Jews for the last 2,500 years. We've been a diaspora nation for most of our history. But being a diaspora nation didn't always pose a problem. As I pointed out, In the Persian Empire, when the Jews lived in every country from India to Ethiopia and in between and Greece and all over, the land of Israel was the land of Israel, and there was a temple in Jerusalem, and Jews from all over the empire could go whenever they wanted. They could settle in Jerusalem, they could not. They were free to go, and most of them went once a year for a holiday. But they had total freedom. No one was compelling them to live wherever they chose to. And the Emperor Cyrus says so in his declaration in the book of Ezra. He writes that. Jews can live wherever they want, but I want the temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. Now, when you get to the Roman Empire, you have a parallel situation, that Jews can choose to live wherever they want to, but their land is the land of Israel, and that's the center. And in fact, even after the Roman Empire becomes Christian, they recognize Israel as the center of the Jewish world in the Roman Empire. The main reason for the diaspora was freedom of movement. The Jews established the diaspora because they chose to, and they were free to do so, under the Eastern Empire of the Persians and the Western Empire of the Romans. That's the way it was established. The Jews were not forced into diaspora. And any history, and I know many histories say, that when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in the year 70, the Jews were dispersed, and that was the beginning of the diaspora. That is false, absolutely false, and it's a product of Christian propaganda. It has nothing to do with historical reality. And the Christian propaganda is persistent. I mean, throughout history, they always try to give a kind of divine plan for anything that happens, getting themselves into traps from which they cannot escape. I mean, some of the church fathers said, the Jewish people lost their control over the Holy Land because they sinned, they didn't accept Christianity, and the Jewish people will be forever in exile, and they will never regain control over the Holy Land, and they will never rule. I mean, they made statements like that, which of course in 1948 was embarrassing. But, you know, some of them adjust to it, and some don't, and the Catholic Church knows how to explain everything to its satisfaction. But the point is, the Christians saw things in what they called the divine plan. This is what God wants, and therefore it happens. Whereas we don't see things that way, and the Jews accepted the fact that Jews were free to live wherever they chose to. The enforced diaspora, the enforced exile, only started when the Christians took control of the Roman Empire. Then they made it difficult, in fact impossible, for the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. It was also exacerbated by the rise of Islam, which we'll talk about later in detail, because in Islam there's also a religious principle, and that is that the Jews can never establish a state in any Muslim land. And that, of course, is one of the problems today as well. That whole notion of what they call Dar al-Islam. Wherever Islam has imposed its control, that is forever Islam. And the rest of the world is the land that is to be conquered by Islam. I mean, this is a religious principle in the Quran. So the Jews then lived wherever they chose to, and this was the growth of the Jewish diaspora. That is how it came about. It lasted until the end of the 20th century. We're living in a very, very dramatic moment in history.